Well, it's Easter and time for me to go to a potluck, and so I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have something to carry my casserole dish in? It's a problem for me every time I go anywhere. How do you keep the lid from falling off? So I usually wrap it around a towel and put it in a box. So this time I've decided to create this little basket that holds the casserole dish in place. And then to keep people from burning their hands, we have this little pot holder that covers it while it's en route. And you can even pick it up, but you might want to hold it like this just to be sure that it doesn't spill. So I'm going to show you how to make this now. We do have instructions. You click down on the description of the video and you'll find a link for the instructions on how to create this wonderful casserole dish warmer carrier. What we're going to use is the fusible batting. It's a heavyweight batting that's fusible on both sides, and choose a fabric that you like. To iron, you want to make sure you got both sides covered when you go to iron so that you don't end up with your iron getting dirty, or use a pressing cloth on one side. It's always a good idea to have a pressing cloth on your ironing board before using any fusible product. So as I work with this, I take and push the iron down and press the steam, and I don't let the iron come up. That way the steam is pushed in and is being held down, and that really seems to work well. However, you should iron both sides. It's a pretty thick batting, and to get the fusing to really hold, you want to make sure that you iron on both sides, or press on both sides. Then you do the little check and you make sure that you can't get the fabric to separate from the batting. And now we're going to go ahead and lay this on top to determine the bottom of the basket size. Simply using a Sharpie marker, just go ahead and make sure that you have batting on all sides of the circumference of the lid, or the widest part of the bowl. And then just draw all the way around. And there we have our bottom of our basket, and these are the strips. You can use the same fabric on both top and bottom, or you can alternate your fabrics. And what we're going to start with is placing yarn all the way around the perimeter of the fabric to make the impression of the wicker feeling of the basket. You cut all the pieces according to the instructions, and now we have to also cut eggs out. And I use the same double-sided fusible batting as a template traced around the pattern, and then you position your egg in different ways on the fabric. That will give each egg a completely different look once cut out. Once you have all your eggs cut out, you're ready to start choosing yarns to go around the outer edges of the eggs, as I have here. You have a really fluffy variegated yarn. This is a chenille yarn found in the baby area of the knitting supply store. And you can see here how I've used a different style yarn combined with a fluffy yarn on the outer perimeter to add more interest and to make each egg look unique. You can see that even though these eggs are done similarly, here I've alternated the color of the yarn and the direction that I stitched the yarn on top to create more interest in the overall look of the basket. We have the sequins and ribbon foot. Comes with a 1/4 inch opening on the presser foot itself. It also has 2 different guides available for it, and they're called the accessory guide set. That allows you to feed different thicknesses of yarns through for couching the yarn down, and that is the what we're actually doing is this entire basket is going to be made with only this foot and the accessory guides. And we're going to use this basket colored style yarn, and you can see how it's knobby. This seems like it would be a perfect guide for this thickness or this width of yarn. But what you do to determine which guide to use is you take it between your fingers and squish and roll it. And as you squish and roll it, it compresses down to its true size. So believe it or not, this is best suited for the larger of the two holes in the smaller accessory guide. So now I'm going to take the guide that came with the foot off. You do so by just turning the nut until it falls off. And then what you look for is this little post here. That little post needs to go into that slot. So you go ahead and put it on. Now it's hard to imagine that I'm going to get that yarn through that hole. I'm doing so by taking some bright colored thread, and I just lay it down onto the machine, and then lay the yarn over the top, grab the two ends of the threads and bring them together, and then insert the thread through the hole. You can see that the yarn is now going to get taken by that thread into the slot. And even though that's pretty thick, 2 layers fit through there. And I've selected an invisible thread. Now there's 2 colors of invisible thread. There's clear and smoke. And to determine which one is the best one for your project, you lay all your fabric colors out across the table and then just lay the threads down. And the color that you see the most is the one that you don't want. In this case, smoke is not the most desirable of the threads. However, it would be best for the basket itself and this darker yarn, and the clear best for this pastel-y color. Nylon is the type of monofilament thread that I use, and it's 4/1000ths in diameter. And nylon withstands high temperatures. I've been ironing it ever since I started using it when I was 16 years old, and everything is still intact, so you don't have to worry about your iron melting your thread. Go ahead and set this aside. We're going to start by sewing around the base of the bowl or the basket. Before you begin, you want to determine if the yarn is in the proper position and lined up with your sewing machine needle. And I like to start using a 3-step zigzag, which is multiple zigzag, which is also the tricot stitch. It's a stitch that goes zig, 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 zag, zag, zag. So 3 stitches per left and right swing of this zigzag stitch. And what it does is it kind of disappears within the yarn's fibers. We want to start with the yarn off the edge of the actual base of the basket. And it's better to just hold the yarn for the first couple stitches to make sure that the needle doesn't push it down into the opening. Once it's attached to the fabric, you no longer have to hold it. Once I've sewn a few stitches with the multiple zigzag stitch, then I lift the foot up, push back, sew a few stitches, and we never have to worry about the end of the yarn ever coming apart from the basket. Now I'm changing to a standard zigzag stitch. Your eye is focused here to make sure that, see, this type of yarn has a thread running through it. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's this little thread that keeps this yarn together, and when it goes through there, it can start to bunch up, and if it does, then you just pull back like this and continue sewing. Now you see my hands. I am not holding or guiding the yarn at all. My eye is focused on the front of the foot, and sometimes I even pull the yarn off to the side so that I can find a location to focus on the machine, and then I don't have to worry about watching the sewing machine needle, which is healthier for you to not lean down to try to see that sewing machine needle. So we always want to sit up with proper posture and never holding our hands down on the fabric. I have invisible thread in needle and bobbin. If you've been told that you can't wind the bobbin with invisible thread, you can. You just want to wind your bobbin slower. I reduced the speed of the bobbin wind by half, and don't have any trouble at all winding a bobbin with the monofilament thread. And the benefit of that is now you don't see the stitch on the top or the bottom. All you see is this wonderful yarn finish around the outer perimeter, and because the yarn is thick, it blocks the batting from showing through. So this white edge that you see along here gets covered up by the yarn that you place on the outside. It's one of the fastest ways of finishing the edge. Now you can see how the yarn is really compressed, and that's because I used a short stitch length. If you want more fluff in your yarn, use a longer stitch length. Now I'm going to cut, and I did secure at the beginning really well with the multiple zigzag stitch, so there's no worries about that ever coming out. And to end, I will switch back to that same stitch, undo some of the stitches, and go back. Remember, the bottom of this bowl is going to be holding in that casserole dish, so we want to make sure we have really strong stitching. And nylon thread is very strong. Head there, and we're going to do the same thing on all of your strips. Okay, so start about 4 inches down from the corner, and then you won't be able to see where you began. And on the basket itself, I like the way that the yarn was really bumpy, so I'm going to increase the stitch length when sewing this, when sewing the strips. A longer length, zigzag stitch. And the width will vary based on the thickness and fluffiness of your yarn. So you can see now that the yarn is not as compressed as it was on the bottom of the basket. What's really nice about using the sequins and ribbon foot is that it literally guides the yarn for you, so there's no need to hold on to it. All you really then need to do is make sure that your fingers are in a position that locks the position of these strips in place. You see that your needle is in fact striking in your left swing. That's all you have to worry about. What happens in the right swing does not matter. And you just lock your fingers in place, and then you can look around while sewing because the foot does the yarn sewing. But remember, we do want to keep our eye on the front and pull back on the yarn if it starts to bunch. It's very fast. When on the corners, I step back, do a couple stitches, and then turn the corner. Notice I don't have to worry about lowering this sewing machine needle. Every corner, you go lift back and do one more stitch back, and then lift the foot and spin around, and see how beautiful that corner is. Pull back on the yarn if it starts to bunch. And most yarns won't have that problem. It's only because this one has that thread running through it. So you might start feeling like you don't really have much to do because you don't have to watch the sit down and focus on making sure that the yarn stays in position, and also the fabric if you don't move your hand. So elbows down, shoulders relaxed, and you'll probably start thinking of other things you can use this for. I can't help but imagine how nice it would be to make a belt using this. And there you have a finished strip. And isn't that just really interesting in the way it looks? Go ahead and continue and repeat that on all of your strips. If you're sewing and you stop focusing on where you're going and you go off the edge like that, all you do is lift up the foot and kind of pull back, set it back down again, and continue. Nobody has to know that you got distracted and stopped looking where you're supposed to. Once you're done, you just pull the yarn out and set it aside. And now we're ready to attach the base to the first strip. And you want to look at it. You can see that on this side the yarn isn't covered, so this is the inside of the bowl. That means that you want it to be facing the inside of the base. Take and place it down, and we're going to go ahead and start on the end using a multiple zigzag stitch to secure these together. And because we need extra strength at the bottom in order to lift the casserole dish up with the handle, you want to make sure that you utilize or use a multiple zigzag stitch all the way around. It's stronger than a traditional zigzag stitch. If you don't have a multiple zigzag stitch, just go around maybe 2 times and that'll be stronger than just going around once. This foot is amazing. It has this innate ability to slip on thick fabrics and make it easier to stitch on them. And also holds really well on elastic, so you don't have to pull from behind when sewing elastic. So you see I just keep forming it around and then pushing my finger down. Not looking at the needle, but looking right here in front of the foot, using that as a measure, as a guide to keep the 2 edges together. And you can just listen to the sound of that needle pushing through all layers. It's 2 layers of batting and 2 layers of yarn, 4 layers of fabric. And it does beautifully, even though it's only a 90-14. I'm not pushing or pulling the fabric through. All I'm doing is holding my finger down on the strip that I'm sewing. As I mentioned at the beginning, I made it so that the strips are longer than the circumference of the basket so that you can adjust if you need to. So as we approach the end, I'm not going to stitch across. This allows me to expand out the base to make it fit better if needed. And now I'm going to lift up and move back. Lift up, move back again, and that should be good enough. And after you've done that, you're going to set this aside while we construct the lattice work or the weaving of the basket strips. Once you have all your strips sewn, you're going to select one to be the handle. So find one that you like. And because that's going to be one that people are going to see the most. And you might want to double check to make sure you covered your yarn and there's no loose stitching. And we're going to start by making an L shape. So this is the handle itself, right here. And I am going to crisscross and leave the same amount on the bottom, staggering out as one of the strips is in size, because we need to insert this into this afterwards. So we're going to be taking it down like that and then stitching it inside. So we want to make sure that we start down about 1.25 inches from the edge. And think about how you're going to stitch it. We want to always stitching on the yarn. I'm using the multiple zigzag stitch for extra strength. Just keep stitching on the yarn and reverse it at the beginning and the end. One to go on there. In this one, we're going to alternate. We have light, now we want dark. And we want to make sure that it is the same distance away. So a 1/4 inch spacing in between the two, and make sure your edges are lined up. It almost seems like this foot is free motion, but it's not. It just has this ability to slip and slide, and makes it so sometimes I don't even feel the need to stop and start over again at the ends. So we're going to do our next one, and the next one's going to be light, facing up, and once again the same distance away from the last one. How many strips you sew is determined by how high the bowl is, and on this basket 4 rows is higher than the actual lid, which was perfect. So we want to count the one that we've already attached to the bottom as 1 row, and now we're actually going to start weaving the rest of the basket. With the other strips that you've sewn, you're now going to weave it through like that. And make sure that your ends are sticking out the same amount. And you're going to stitch, once again, always following the yarn. So you can see this is very strong when we're finished, and it needs to be. If you have some spaghetti inside of that casserole dish, you want to make sure it stays on there. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and cut right along that yarn. Before we complete the basket, we're going to stitch along this edge one more time, so you can see on the basket it's a lot thicker on that top leading edge. Take that cut end now and line it up, and this time we're going to go on top and pull this one over, and then follow the yarn. If you feel the need to push, increase stitch length. The machine will then do the pushing for you, and you won't have to worry about breaking a needle or hurting your hand. Don't forget the next section down. We want to make sure we have this so that it won't start to change shape as we go around. There we cut. And then you continue doing this, alternating all the way down until you have completed your basket. It's beginning to look a lot like a basket, isn't it? It's so much fun to build something this way. And I think of all kinds of things we could do with this. You could even just make a placemat like that. Keep on going, getting close to finished. Periodically you want to double check to see if it is the right size, because I have you cut your strips longer than you need. You can see how nicely that's forming into a basket. But we're not quite all the way around yet. I'm going to double check to make sure I do need to go one more row. Putting it on again. And you want to do so with the little flaps inside the bowl. I was perfect. It's time to stop now. Another reason I had you cut your strips longer is because your bowls frequently will come out like that, and that's why I also had you use the lid as a template for the base. This gives you time to form this, and you can pin it if you want, or use clips, or eyeball it like I do by simply looking and lining up the edge of this with the edge of the one beneath it. So I'm going to stitch down that, but not until I first go all the way around the top of the bowl one more time with the yarn for the areas or the strips that I cut that have raw edges on them. And to give it uniformity, I'm going to start all the way on the end, which means I'm going to go back over the handle. So, forward and back to secure it. And to give it more fluff, I'm going to go ahead and use a zigzag stitch instead of the multiple zigzag stitch to finish the edge, so that more yarn gets to puff out. Changing my width and my length. Increasing the length gives it more puff, remember that? So we just go ahead now and keep your eye focused on the front leading edge of the foot. Notice that I cradle my fabrics, that I don't put my hands on top of the fabric and hold them down. Let the machine do the feeding and let the foot guide the yarn. No need for you to touch that yarn unless it starts to bunch up in front of the opening, and then you'll just pull it back a little bit. Oh, it's getting exciting. Secure the end with that multiple zigzag stitch. All right, line it up where where I have the overlap at the beginning. And this way, if as you're stitching it, you cause your fabric to stretch out at all, you have the ability to sew that side seam up afterward. So I pull that flap back, place this underneath, and we're going to stitch on the actual yarn edge right here. So you're going to kind of eyeball it. Make sure it's pushed all the way in. There we go. So for those of you who like to use pins, go ahead and use them, but be careful not to stitch over them. I prefer to not use pins unless I absolutely need them. Remember, if you feel the desire to push, that you increase your stitch length on the machine instead. Just don't go too long, because if you go too long, then the stitch isn't as strong. If you feel that you might have gone too long, then you can go around the basket one more time. Stitch around twice when in doubt. It's pretty resilient, so if you have to squish it to form it around, it will bounce back and have nice body and shape when you're finished. So don't worry about crunching it to get it to fit in there. Remember, I'm not pushing the fabric through, so if you start feeling the desire to do so, increase your stitch length. Now on this next part, if you feel the desire to hand sew, you're welcome to do so. But I think with a little determination, you can sew it by machine, as I do here. So we're going to go ahead now and bring this around, making sure that the bowl fits inside. Take your strap or your basket handle and put it over. That's part of what fits inside of here. Another thing that's going to be going inside of here are the eggs. So you want to make sure you give a little bit of room for the thickness of the eggs, as they are going to be formed all the way around the inside, so that you can take the lid out and get the bowl back out when you're finished. Now you can see right here, this is where you might want to pin, and we're going to take these straps and not be on the outside but bring them on the inside. Okay, and now I'm pinching my finger, but if you have one of the clamps, you could clamp that. It was hard to get it under there, so you don't want to take it out and bring it back in again. Just go ahead and open it up and slide down to the next strap. Try to line up the yarn of the one on top with the yarn on the one on the bottom. One more to do here, and over. And the last one. This is when, if you're nervous, you might want to switch to a 16 universal needle. Pull it out. And we have a nice side, but we need to secure this strap down and also stitch the handle in place. This side we can go on the top. The handle needs to be secure in there, so that you can pick up your dish without the handle falling off. And then I go inside the bowl, and I'm going to cut short the pieces that were our adjustments to make it so that we could go bigger if we needed to. All right, securing that flap. basket is starting to look very nice, and we're ready to sew the eggs, which I've already stitched some of them. And we'll go ahead and stitch the eggs inside of the basket. And you can just go around with a straight stitch around this. You don't need to use multiple zigzag stitch to secure the eggs in place. So we'll go ahead now and make some eggs. Now keep in mind the eggs are going to be sticking out, and the tops of the eggs are going to be sticking out. So I would start the yarn towards the bottom of the egg. And you can tell, you can't really see where I started and stopped, but here's the start stop. Down at the bottom of the egg is where you want to start. And as before, if you want more of the yarn to show, then you need to use a zigzag stitch versus a multiple zigzag stitch. And then it's pretty much just hold your finger down on one side like this, and then it stitches it all together for you. So in other words, you don't have to sit like this and hold on. It's just one finger pushing down, and it helps it spin in a circular pattern. Cross over where you were. Multiple zigzag stitch to tie it off. And there you have your first egg ready to be inserted into the bowl. Keep in mind, every time you want to start down at the bottom of the egg. And this time I'm going to leave the multiple zigzag stitch to give it a little more contrast with the other eggs. So just changing it up like that causes the look to change enough to where it seems as though you switched to a different yarn. Okay, we got those eggs done. Now I'm going to show you how to secure the eggs to the top of your basket. You can see here I did 3 different yarns, and I did 2 at a time and then a single one to create this unusual look. It's all up to you as to how creative you get. So this is a good mix. I'll do stripes, oranges, purples, and polka dots. And if I keep alternating that inside, it will look good from all sides. Now if you like to pin, you could pin these in place first. Keep in mind that the furry side faces out, so that because the casserole will be inside. So I'll start with this one. And it kind of looks neat when it comes over the handle of the basket. So I'll go ahead now and place it underneath and hold it steady so that it doesn't move, because we like that position. And I'm using a straight stitch, so a few stitches forward, a few stitches back. And the reason I'm using a straight stitch is that if I don't like one of the eggs placement, I can easily remove a straight stitch and then put it back in and try it again. Using a longer stitch length makes it even easier to rip it out. If you like your egg placement, then all you'll do is stitch around again with a little bit shorter stitch length to make it stronger. There we go. And the next one I thought would be purple. Although this one has a really nice accent, I hate to hide it behind a handle, so I think I'll go with the orange. And we'll place the orange so that it's underneath and at an angle. Then you want to go slow when you're overlapping, just in case your machine is having trouble getting up and over the thicknesses. And if it is, increasing stitch length will help the machine feed for you. Stop about 1/2 inch in and grab your next color. This is when I wanted polka dots next. Slowly, and make sure you really go slow where the handle is, because then you have a lot more layers. And I'm not pushing, I'm letting the machine do it. I'll look back and see, I started with the stripes, but if you stack it that way, you won't have to think about it. Next is our polka dots. Making sure I don't sew over the handle. That's right, I got it in order, I don't have to think. And this one has a cute little design, and I want to make sure that this stripe is sticking up above the basket. And these eggs can be pointing into one another. Now I'm coming up on where my handle crosses, so I'm going to be very slow. There we go. Looks like I made a lot more eggs than I needed. That is so much fun. Got carried away. Okay, so we're at the beginning again, and since I used a long stitch length, we'll go around one more time. This is the reason we use invisible thread in the needle and the bobbin. So you don't see the stitch on the outside after you've stitched your eggs into the basket. And there you have it. The eggs attached to the basket, and now our casserole dish drops in nicely. And it's time to finish the edge of this. On the first one, I used a matching purple, but I'm really liking the way this white yarn looks around the outside edge. And since I did the eggs the same inside, I'm going to go ahead and finish this with the same matching yarn. And use the multiple zigzag stitch to secure it, as before. Switch to a zigzag stitch. Increase your width and your length. And then it's just one finger, and don't pick your finger up. So you can zoom, zoom, zoom. Switch back to the multiple zigzag. Go ahead now and flip this over and start going the opposite direction. Since people will be picking this up, it's good to do both sides so that each side has equal coverage of yarn on the edge. Well, I cut that length just right. Almost done. Secure it with a multiple zigzag stitch. And you now can fit your lid inside your basket. Your guests can pick up the lid without being burned. And you have a beautiful presentation for your next potluck. I hope that you enjoyed learning this, and happy Easter!